In the quiet countryside where the wind rolls over wheat fields and the sun sets with a golden blaze over weathered barns, a story unfolded that would feel more at home in a blockbuster movie than in real life. It began with an elderly woman, a farm, and a group of troublemakers who thought they had chosen the perfect target for an evening of mischief. What they didn't know was that the seemingly fragile farmer they planned to harass carried a past so extraordinary that every move she made came from years of survival, discipline, and precision. She was not merely an elderly woman living in solitude on her ranch. She was a retired Special Forces sniper, a legend in her own right, with stories classified in thick folders locked away in government archives. The young men who rolled into her dusty driveway that night had no idea what fate awaited them. To them, this was nothing more than a cruel game. A handful of bored troublemakers, emboldened by alcohol and arrogance, decided to terrorize the old lady on the hill. They imagined smashing her barn doors, stealing tools, frightening her animals, and making her beg for mercy. They expected fear, tears, or frantic phone calls to the sheriff. What they got instead was a masterclass in controlled power, cunning tactics, and an unforgettable reminder that appearances can be dangerously deceiving. Her name was Evelyn Carter. For over 2 decades she had served her country, often in places whose names she could never repeat in public, carrying out missions that demanded patience, precision, and nerves of steel. She had been stationed in deserts, jungles, and frozen wastelands, watching through her scope for days without moving, her heartbeat trained to slow itself to remain undetectable. By the time she retired, she was considered one of the most skilled marksmen her unit had ever seen. But retirement didn't mean erasing those instincts. On her ranch, she lived peacefully, tending her garden, feeding her chickens, and reading at night by the fire. Yet beneath the calm exterior, the warrior within her never slept. When she first noticed the glare of headlights cutting through the fields toward her property, Evelyn's senses sharpened. The crackling laughter that echoed into the night didn't sound like visitors or neighbors. It was the careless, swaggering sound of young men who thought the world belonged to them. She quietly set down her book, reached into the cabinet by the door, and pulled out a rifle that had not seen use in years, yet was cleaned and ready as though she had been expecting this moment all along. It wasn't fear that guided her, it was muscle memory, training, and the same calm that had once steadied her in firefights half a world away. The bullies stormed into her yard with all the subtlety of a stampede, kicking over buckets, rattling the chicken coop, and shouting insults meant to provoke. To them, she was an old woman whose screams would amuse them. But Evelyn never screamed. From the shadows of her porch, she watched them with the steady eyes of a predator who has learned the value of patience. She knew the power of letting the enemy overestimate themselves. The first shot was not aimed at them, but at the lamp they had smashed against the barn wall. The sudden crack split the air, and the light went out, plunging part of the yard into darkness. Silence followed for a split second, then startled curses. The boys were confused. They thought it might have been fireworks or a random noise. Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest smile. She had used warning shots before, in jungles where revealing her presence without taking a life was sometimes enough to scatter the opposition. But the bullies were too drunk, too reckless to retreat. They kept moving, kicking her tools into the dirt, smashing a window of the barn. Evelyn adjusted her grip, exhaled slowly, and squeezed again. This time the bullet sliced through the night and shattered the headlight of their truck. Glass rained down as sparks flickered. Now fear began to creep into their voices. They shouted at one another, demanded to know who else might be out there, but none of them suspected the small figure watching from the porch could be responsible. The tactics she used that night were not random acts of intimidation. They were measured strategies rooted in decades of training. She knew how to disorient, how to break the confidence of a group, how to turn their arrogance into panic. Every time they tried to regroup, she fired another precise shot, into the ground inches from their feet, into the air above their heads, into the handle of the crowbar one boy was swinging. The metal rang as it clattered to the ground, and the boy dropped it with a yelp, certain he had barely escaped with his life. As fear grew, bravado withered. They no longer laughed. Their movements grew clumsy, frantic, colliding with one another as they searched for an escape. One whispered that they should leave, another insisted they couldn't back down now, but their courage was draining fast. Evelyn stepped into the dim light, finally letting them see her. She looked exactly like the grandmother they had mocked from afar, short gray hair, lines etched into her face by years of both hardship and wisdom. But in her eyes burned a fire that no one could mistake. Her voice was steady, firm, and sharp as steel when she finally spoke. "You picked the wrong farm tonight." Those words were all it took to shatter the last of their arrogance. The leader, who had swaggered into her property with the loudest laugh, now stammered apologies, backing away with shaking hands. The others followed, tripping over themselves to reach the truck. The sight of their supposed victim standing unflinching, rifle cradled with expert ease, dissolved every illusion of control they had brought with them. They scrambled inside, slammed the doors, and struggled to start the damaged vehicle. The engine coughed, headlights flickered uselessly, and in that instant, they realized how powerless they were. Evelyn didn't have to chase them away. She simply stood there, silent, until the truck sputtered into life and tore down the dirt road, vanishing into the night. When silence returned to the ranch, Evelyn lowered her weapon. Her animals stirred nervously but settled when they saw her calm movements. She went back inside, locked the door, and poured herself a cup of tea as though nothing had happened. To her, it was just another night when instincts kept her safe. But for the bullies, it was a night they would never forget. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the small town. The young men did not dare tell the full story, but fragments slipped out, fragments of an elderly woman with impossible aim, who seemed to vanish into the darkness and strike with supernatural precision. The sheriff, who had known Evelyn for years, only smiled knowingly when he heard. "You boys should count yourselves lucky," he told them. "You met her on her ranch, not on a battlefield. Out there, she wasn't someone you could have walked away from." The legend of Evelyn Carter grew after that night. To outsiders, she remained just another farmer living alone in the countryside. But those who knew the story understood that within her lived decades of discipline, sacrifice, and mastery that most could never imagine. She wasn't simply a woman defending her farm. She was a reminder of the resilience and strength that often hide in plain sight. The tale carries a powerful message that resonates far beyond her ranch. It reminds us never to underestimate others, never to assume weakness in those who appear frail, never to dismiss the wisdom and strength of the generations before us. The bullies thought they were invincible, but they walked straight into the path of someone whose life had been dedicated to mastering the very skills they mocked. And in one unforgettable night, their arrogance dissolved into terror and respect. Evelyn never bragged about her past. She never told stories of missions, never sought attention for her service. But the events of that night revealed what true power looks like. It is not loud, not showy, not careless. It is quiet confidence, controlled precision, and the ability to protect without cruelty. She didn't harm them because she didn't need to. Her message was delivered without bloodshed, yet it was more effective than any violence could have been. The world today often celebrates youth, strength, and dominance, but Evelyn's story flips that narrative. Her greatest strength lay not in her age or her experience alone, but in her discipline, her refusal to be shaken, and her mastery of patience. The young men who raided her farm will carry that night with them forever. Perhaps it will change the way they see others. Perhaps it will make them think twice before mocking or threatening someone who seems vulnerable. For in every quiet soul, in every weathered face, there might be a story, a history, a power invisible to the naked eye. And so, the image lingers, an elderly woman standing firm on her ranch, rifle in hand, her eyes glowing with memories of distant battlefields, her heart steady, her will unbreakable. She is not merely a survivor. She is a legend who taught a lesson no classroom could ever teach. And somewhere out there, a group of men who once thought themselves untouchable now know exactly what it feels like to cross paths with a legendary Special Forces sniper. This version runs about 1,600 words in length and is written in a flowing, cinematic style perfect for a YouTube storytelling video. Would you like me to also adapt it into a spoken word script format, with more dramatic pauses, voice cues, and suspenseful emphasis so it fits a narrator's performance style?